Alright, forgive me in advance for not being a good speaker and not being able to pause, but I'm going to tell you about something I think is cool, which is waves and stuff. So here's a good old wave that, where's my pointer? Alright, basically you have the length, the wider it is, the lower pitched, the taller it is, the louder it is. Tall point is called the crest, low point is called the trough, and the middle point, if it were being held, well, basically it's just any spot where there isn't any movement. If it were a note that was being held at each end, this would be called a standing wave. The less amount of bumps, the lower pitched it is, and the lowest pitch note you can have in between 2 points would just be one single arc, and that's called the fundamental. So there was a guy named Pythagoras. You know him as the guy who made the triangle easier to understand by using smaller numbers. He liked small numbers, and so he applied it to this. One day he had a note, or he had a string. He had a string. He plucked it. Let's call it a G. I don't know what it was, but I'm going to say it was a G. So then he plucked another string, same tension and everything, but half the distance, like half the length. It was a G again, but an octave higher. And then he plucked a third string. It had 1/3 the length, same tension and everything, and it was a D, let's say. G and D make a power chord, or a fifth, if you want to call it that. Of course you would. But, so yeah. And then he kept going, and he realized that the closer ones, the ones he kind of started off with, were more consonant, which basically just means good. It doesn't mean happy or sad, it just means good. Notes that sound bad together, that harmonize not very well, are called dissonant. So over here, I'm going to show you kind of an example, well, an explanation. You could kind of think of this as strings on a guitar. This is actually what they would be doing, but they happen so fast that we really don't notice. And they don't actually look anything like either of these, but rather multiple ones of these combined. You would always have this one. So let's say I played a G string. I would pluck the string, and it would be a G, obviously. But in the background, you would also have this going on, and it's also a G, but an octave higher. And then you'd have this going on. It's also, well, it's a D, but it's quieter. You could go on farther and farther and farther. You can't really go on for infinity, and the reason for that is because since this is half the distance, or sorry, since this is the second harmonic, it's twice as high pitched, but half the amplitude, or half the volume. And the same goes for this. It's a third as high, but also, 3 times as high, but a third of the volume, and then it gets higher and higher and quieter forever. But it doesn't actually go forever, because forever isn't possible. At least I don't think it is. But if it were to go forever, and you were to have every single one of these, you would have what is called a sawtooth wave, where it goes straight up, diagonal, straight up, diagonal. Of course, you can't actually go straight up, because that's not possible. But anyways, and it's not exactly that this is half as loud, that's just the loudest it can be. It can be quieter, and depending on which ones you have, that will affect, I guess, what is called the timbre, or you could just call it whether it's bassy or trebly, sort of like knobs on a stereo or an amp. If you were to have only odd ones, and they were as high as they could be, you would have what's called a square wave, which is basically just a bunch of square shapes. Yeah, and then if you had only the odd ones, but they kind of got quieter and quieter faster, you would have a triangle wave, shaped like a triangle, obviously. So, oh yeah, and so something to think about is basically, if you play guitar, you might notice that if you put your finger halfway down, but not all the way down, in the middle of the string, it will play a note an octave higher. Well, the reason for that is because by doing that, you're dampening every other harmonic that could possibly be played in that string, and all the energy in the string is being put towards the G's higher than the first one. But of course you would hear this one because that one's louder. So yeah. What else? Okay, so basically I guess it was in the medieval times or whatever, they tried to figure out, you know, how many notes are there. So what they did was they took this 2 to 3 ratio and they would kind of stack it. So they would have G to D, and then the 2 to 3 ratio starting from D would be what is it, D to A, and then they would go on and go on. I'll show you. Basically, that's what they did. Here's the order that they would go in. So they did that stacking situation, whatever, but they didn't exactly have these notes yet. They just had notes, but they didn't know what they were yet. So they did that until they ended up with the note they started with and realized, hey, there's 12 notes. But the G that they ended, or the note that they ended with, didn't exactly sound like the note they started with. So then they realized, hey, we can't have good music. We have to come up with some rule to make all the notes evenly spaced. So this is what they have. Basically, if you were to play this note, let's say it has a frequency of 1, you wouldn't actually hear that, but let's say it has a frequency of 1, and then you play this note, it has a frequency of 2 to the 1 over 12, which is basically like 1.05 blah 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 blah. And then from here, it's the same thing, and it goes on until you get to the octave, which will perfectly match it, or be a double of it. But then there were people like me who say, hey, what if there is a way to have that those perfect harmonies in a scale? Many people have tried. There's different ways to do it, but all of them are basically they're just called just intonation. Well, my version of just intonation, which is based off of the overtone sequence, which is it's the thing I showed you a second ago. This thing. I made a thing out of it. I'll show you. So over here, again you have G, then you have the octave, and then it doubles over. Oh yeah, over here I guess would be the number of the harmonic. It would be 1, then 1, 2, then 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then it just keeps doubling over. Every time it doubles over, it has more notes in between, or more harmonics. So over here, here's a way to see it as notes. Here you have G, D, G, which is a power chord or a fifth. Over here you have G, B, D, F, G, which is a dominant 7, which can basically just be thought of as a major chord with a note, 2 notes under the octave added to it. And then over here you would have basically a major scale, but with 1 extra note. It would be that note. Or you could think of it as what's called Mixolydian, or just the 5th mode, with an added major 7. 5th mode basically just means if you took the major scale and started from the 5th note and went from the 5th note to its octave, but still using the same notes in the major scale. I consider that more because you get this F before you get this F sharp. And then you double it over again, and you have basically all the notes you'd have on a piano and a couple extras, which I have called the missing notes. You can't put them on a piano because remember, these aren't evenly spaced like a piano or a guitar, frets on a guitar. So what else? Notes. Okay, and then there's also something called the undertone sequence. I'm not sure if it's actually relevant in nature or relevant at all, but basically think of it as all of these ratios inverted. So let's say you had a GD, GD, over here it's 2, 3. Now flip it over and double it. So it would be 3 over 2, and then, flipped would be 3 over 2, and then doubled would be 3 over 4. So 3 over 4 is from the G would actually be a a C. But it wouldn't. Well, basically, yeah, if you inverted every single ratio between two notes, you wouldn't exactly have the same ratios for the same intervals or spaces between two notes in what is called the what I guess I would call the undertone just intoned chromatic scale. So basically just imagine all of this but flipped over this line. So if you've ever seen those circles where they have notes all around them and people draw shapes in them to represent chords, then I'm going to show you that again, but sort of my version. So over here, well yeah, hold on. Like I said, I can't pause, so one moment please. Alright. Whoops. Okay, so here it is. They're all evenly spaced because I'm going by cents. There's 100 cents between each note. This is just a major chord. It doesn't matter what the notes are. That's what it would look like. And then over here, there's the overtone, just intoned chromatic scale. Same chord, but the shape is just a little bit different. But it's the same chord. It would sound about the same, but this would sound better. And then over here you have the same thing, but again, it's basically just this but mirrored, like flipped over. And then it's the same chord, so yeah, they all look a little bit different. This is going by cents. Now going by frequency, over here, where they were equally spaced, you would see that the space between the dots get closer and closer, because that's what would literally happen. So this again is a major chord, but the dots get closer and closer exponentially until if it were to go again, it would be half the distance of this. Like here's one note, and if this were to go around again, it would go halfway. If it were to go all the way around, it would only make it halfway around the circle, and then the octave after that would only make it this far, and then the octave after that would only make it this far. It would keep on going. It would never quite get to there, but yeah, it'll never quite get to there, which is why you can't have an infinite amount of I don't know, I just went blank. But anyways, then here's the exponential frequency version of the overtone major chord, just intoned overtone major chord, and then you have the inverted or undertone just intoned major chord. So now you can look at all those. So yeah, if you want to know how I did it, it's a pain in the butt. I really don't want to explain it, but actually that's a lie. If you really want to know, I'll explain it, because you know I should. So here's something I noticed. Here's the very first one I showed you, equally spaced 12 lines. Let's say you had a B and then you have an F. That makes a very dissonant chord, which is called a tritone. You've probably heard it in like metal or something. It's a really crappy chord. That's kind of the point. And then the note directly in between those is a D. So B, D, F would make a diminished chord. Again, it's just a really crappy chord. Well, if you were to draw lines between them, this would make a right angle, and the ratio, oh yeah, and then it would basically just be an isosceles right triangle. So if you took this line and compared it to this, you would have the ratio 1/2, but then if you took the frequency of this and the frequency of this and made a fraction, it would also be 1/2. So yeah, that's basically what I just explained, is that. But why? Isn't that kind of weird? So what I want to do is kind of measure all the distances between the lines of this circle and all the other circles I made, and see if they're significant or if they have anything to do with the chords. Yeah, that's it. There's really no reason. I just thought it was cool. So if I said anything that was false, feel free to correct me. I don't want to misinform anyone. It's just some stuff I did, so that's all.